So the season is coming up. The Browns are getting ready to play, but the Browns really aren't the only team that we need to worry about, right? There's other teams that are going to be instrumental to the Browns' success or lack thereof. If it happens this year, and those teams are in the AFC North. And as you guys know, I do a show called AFC North Talk with three other co-hosts who represent all of the other AFC North teams, and I like to have them on. And now here to get a scoop, a inside look on the Bengals, we got the Wojnarowski, the Shams of Bengals Nation. Ace Boogie, how you doing?
I'm good, Quincy. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing all right. Now, this is going to be put out a little bit after we record it. So if somebody gets cut that we talked about, or if there's a small detail here, try to forgive us. We try to do some of these things in advance because we're busy people and we can only link up at certain times, unless it's Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5:30 on AFC North Talk. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because we go live there 2 times a week during the football season. But Ace, we're here to talk about your Bengals. A lot of interesting stuff for the Bengals, right? You have that explosive offense that everybody's talking about, the ideal of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. Granted, we haven't been able to see them really share the field together because they're being cautious, rightfully so, with Joe Burrow's injury. The offensive line situation, the defense, there are a lot of question marks with the Bengals. So I just want to kind of start out generally with you. How do you feel like the Bengals are? Well, what kind of a place do you feel like the Bengals are at? And do you feel better about this team than you did going into training camp?
I think for several reasons, I definitely feel a lot better, primarily when it comes to the offensive line and the defensive line. Those were pretty much my biggest worries of this team, especially when you talk about Joe Burrow coming off of an injury, him getting hit so many times last season. The big question this offseason is how can they protect Joe Burrow? And is the addition of bringing Frank Pollock back as an offensive line coach, is that going to be enough? Is just signing Riley Reef going to be enough? Originally, as you know, I didn't feel like it was enough. I felt like they needed to sign or draft Penei Sewell and sign some other linemen, and they really didn't end up doing that. And so the one thing that I will say is I think that Frank Pollock has definitely put his imprint on this offensive line, and I've been extremely impressed with the job that he's done, especially when it comes to the selections of some of the younger linemen that we took in the draft. Deontay Smith has been a pleasant surprise. He's a kid that they drafted that I assumed initially was just going to be a prospect type player because we did have a wild season last year where some guys not playing. He lost a bunch of weight. He came from a smaller school. So at the time, I was just like, this guy is probably someone that, they'll use a year or two from now. He has actually developed into one of the exciting reserve lineman for them. He's had PFF, take it with a grain of salt, but he's had PFF grades of like 80. And just not even just looking at the PFF grades, when you watch him, he just plays with some aggressiveness. And you've seen that from a lot of Bengals that we haven't seen. I mean, I remember last year watching a lot of the Browns games on the rewatch and prepping for AFC North Talk. And the thing that stood out to me was how the linemen came off of the ball and how nasty they were in the trenches. It was like they would punch you in the mouth. They would really attack the defense. And that's what I've seen from the mindset of the Frank Pollock injection is a lot of these guys getting tougher, trying to be bullies, and guys like Deontay Smith doing their thing, guys like Jonah Williams getting some more polish because now he's actually getting coached up. Guys like Michael Jordan, who honestly a lot of people freaked out because they listed him as the day one starter, but he's even shown some promise in the preseason, although they did cut him earlier today. But just seeing the growth from a lot of the players on the team and in the offensive line room has given me at least some comfort in knowing that Joe Burrow will be protected at least better in this upcoming season. The Bengals line, believe it or not, only surrendered 1 sack this entire preseason. There were so many clean pockets. It was weird, though, because Joe Burrow wasn't playing. So they were able to pretty much put together this line, and it seems that they've gotten rid of the 2 guys that pretty much got him hurt, which was our old offensive line coach and Jim Turner and Michael Jordan, and they've replaced them with Quentin Spain, Xavier Suafilo, Jackson Carman, hasn't lived up to the second round pick yet, but he has been a solid reserve. And I actually feel comfortable with the offensive line. Now, the defensive line has also gone through some things, and I feel a lot better about it, especially since they only had 17 sacks last year. They were really bad, not only in the pass rushing department, they were also bad against the run. Obviously, the Baltimore Ravens ran for like 500 yards on them at the end of the season. And so one of the things that they did was they attacked that position throughout free agency and in the draft. And I definitely saw a considerable difference because they ended up hiring a defensive line coach from Miami named Marion Hobby, who's really kind of done his own injection of putting his own feel on the line. And you can just see it. Unfortunately, we lost Joseph Asai, who was a guy that they drafted in the third round, and he ended up beating Tristan Wirfs when he was in on the first team. A lot of people were excited about him, but he ended up going on to the IR with a knee injury and a wrist injury. So unfortunately that happened. But then, we've seen some undrafted guy by the name of Darius Hodge, who has come out of nowhere. And I believe PFF graded him as one of the top edge rushers throughout the preseason. We didn't expect him. I don't know where he came from, but he's an undrafted guy that's definitely made his impact felt. Khalid Kareem, a second-year edge rusher, definitely seems to have put it together. It just seems like the coaching is a lot better, and the technique has definitely helped a lot of these guys get better. And I've seen it against the run. Now, obviously, a lot of stuff is vanilla in preseason, so you can't really read too much into it, but it's noticeably different when you look at just those two trenches. As far as places that I still have concerns, I would probably say once Trey Waynes went down again with another injury, the secondary was looking much improved. But then Trey Waynes gets hurt again with his hamstring and reportedly is going to be out for a month again. And so it just seems like here we go again with losing that stability at the cornerback position, which was a position that they attacked in this offseason. And I think that Cheeto is definitely going to be probably our biggest acquisition in terms of that was kind of under the radar, but will pay more dividends. He's been good. Mike Hilton's done solid. But us losing Trey Waynes there, that stability is now gone because now you're going to have to put in Eli Apple, and now you're going to have an issue on the boundary at corner. So that's one thing that concerned me. Linebacker, we've really honestly, I didn't see much in this preseason, and I'm not expecting much from them. I still think that it's a concern. I think that you at least need to have like one linebacker that people actually know. And Logan Wilson, maybe he can be that, but I didn't see anything where if teams come against us and they have tight ends or they have mismatches for our linebackers, I'm not confident that they're going to be able to step up in terms of that. So those are things that I'm kind of concerned about. And then the biggest concern really has been, and the biggest story has been Jamar Chase, right? So obviously Jamar Chase has come in with all this hype. He's previously played with Joe Burrow. The first game he goes out against the Bucs, he catches a screen pass, makes a nice little run after catch, and it's over. Well, in the second game, Jamar Chase had 3 straight drops, and they hit him in the hand. He should have caught him. And so then everybody's like, well, what's going on? This is coming off of the John Ross era where John Ross was notoriously known for drops. And obviously there was a division within the Houday Nation about Penei Sewell or Chase. And so when that happened, a lot of people were like, man, we should have taken Penei. But the crazy part about it is Penei is struggling too at the same time. He's given up 3 sacks in Detroit. And so it's kind of been a weird dynamic right now in Houday Nation where people are upset with Chase because of that game. And then he gets into the third game and he bounced back a little bit. Like at first I thought it was really going to be a thing because after that game, the second game against the Washington football team, the next day, the first pass in practice, he dropped it. And everybody was like, all right, it's a mental thing now. Like this is an issue. And he like yelled a cuss word or something like that. And then the next practice, he was catching everything. He stayed after practice to get on the jug machine and things of that nature. And then the following week, he had great practices, 3 touchdowns. And so it seemed like it was going to be an issue that was in the past because everyone literally has been talking about it because how can you drop every single target? You got picked at number 5. Like there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And so then once it's like, oh yeah, everybody's backing him up. The media is like, oh, he killed it in practice this week. Joe Burrow's coming back. The second play of the game, Joe Burrow throws Jamar Chase a screen pass and he drops it. And the one concerning thing about that is if you pick a player at number 5, you're expecting him to come in and do all of these things. The bar was set so high. And honestly, I didn't feel, I never was huge on Jamar Chase, but I felt like our fans set the bar so high that this guy was going to come in and be AJ Green 2.0, and they were expecting all of this. And a lot of people have to realize he hasn't played since 2020. This is the NFL. It's a completely different level of competition. He's going to have and go against guys that are extremely talented and stuff like that. And so he just has not, at this moment, kind of lived up to it. And so some people are brushing it away. I tend to side with the group where it's like, okay, well, now if this continues to happen in the regular season, then it's a problem, but it's definitely concerning, and you definitely have to monitor it because obviously you can't pick a guy number 5 and then he just drops ball after ball after ball. And so that's been something that's been somewhat concerning because it seems to be a mental thing. I'm not sure exactly what it is, and Chase is going to have to figure it out. And this Bengals offense is going to have to figure it out. Now, they don't have to solely depend on just Jamar Chase, but that is something to monitor with him being, somewhat razzled right now with drops. And so that's one of the things that I probably say is concerning the linebackers, Jamar Chase's drops. I will probably say tight end. Not that CJ Uzoma isn't solid. I think that he's good, but I really didn't see anything in the preseason to give me any kind of encouragement about my guy Drew Sample or anything as far as our third tight end. That was also somewhat concerning. And I will also say, even though the pass blocking was extremely well, I will say the run blocking, it was hard to kind of see. It didn't seem like they opened up many holes. So that's something that I'm going to continue to monitor going into the season. But at the running back position, one person that actually stood out, I think the most, is the rookie Chris Evans that they drafted out of Michigan, who's really fit into that Giovanni Bernard role extremely well. He's a guy that they will definitely, I believe, be able to use in the passing game, kind of a third down scat back. Did have some issues with trying to go left too many times and trying to juke too many people. So he did have to kind of learn, NFL is a one-cut league. You can't just try to Reggie Bush yourself out there with all of those kind of plays. But those are my concerns, and those are some of the things that I've seen thus far throughout training camp that I've noticed from the Bengals.
Yeah, and the Jamar Chase drop thing, like that's a weird one and kind of a scary one,
Right.
because we have seen, guys who haven't had a drop history in college, all of a sudden they come to the NFL, one bad drop leads into another, then it starts to become a mental stigma, and it just starts to become this big thing that is hard for somebody to get over with. I don't even know if John Ross was he a great catcher at the football coming out? I don't think he was coming out of Washington, but still it's something that got him. David Njoku, it's happened with him. It's taken a while for him to shake back, and even then, he's not the most consistent with it. And yeah, the drops with the wide receiver, I talked about this with Tony when we are talking about the Steelers and their drops, right, with Chase Claypool and everything else. Right. Once those start happening, and they start happening, consistently, it can be kind of difficult to get that to stop, just because it's like missing your free throws, right? Right. It becomes one of those things everybody talks about. All of a sudden now everybody's doing a chant when you're at your free throw line because they know you ain't good at it. It just becomes one of those things. And with Jamar Chase, maybe it's him just knocking off some rust, not getting used to being hit. But, sometimes when you miss out a year of football, you might lose some of those instincts that you used to have that might have told you to lay out. And it's hard to gain those things back because you're essentially asking your brain, hey, let me get hurt again. Let me opt into this pain, when that's exactly against the nature of everything a football player wants to do. I think that's going to be something interesting to watch. And it's going to be even tougher for him, I think, because the Bengals already have a history with John Ross, right, where he was drafted really early. People had a lot of expectations for him. Talented as everything, but just could not consistently catch the ball. So now he's going to catch all of the John Ross frustration just because of what he did in preseason. And it could turn out to be just a mountain of things that just make it hard for him to overcome. And, people joke, but things like this can derail a career very early. I've seen plenty of great players in Cleveland. Well, players with great potential in Cleveland, who have been on the wrong side of a bad situation and their career just never recovered quite from that. So that's going to be something interesting there. The last thing I want to touch on with the Bengals is Zac Taylor. You mentioned some of the coaching underneath him has been much better. I think he has made some adjustments there on his coaching staff that were much needed. I mean, like we talked about the offensive line coach situation from last year was terrible. From what you have seen in training camp, how he structured things and how people are receiving him so far in preseason, you think he's making, this is year 3 for him. Do you think he's making the proper steps in year 3 to, because we talked about him when he was hired as being way too young, way too early for him. Does he look like somebody who's maturing into that head coach role?
I think he definitely is. Like, one of the things that I kind of took away, I've never seen him, if I'm not mistaken, in-person coaching, right? And so I went to that first preseason game, and it sounds silly, but he was taking it pretty serious. And I just watching his demeanor and seeing him do things like make challenges and stuff like that, he knows that his job is on the line. The one thing that I will say though is I think now, not that it wasn't fair to assess his success and measure him as a coach the last 2 years. I think now he's finally gotten a roster underneath him that actually fits his scheme offensively and our defensive staff's scheme as well. And I think that was one of the things that we kind of struggle with, because as you know, with the Bengals being used to the Marvin Lewis era, it was the same scheme for a long time, right? When you talk about the offensive line blocking scheme, when you talk about the offense scheme in general, defense. And when he came in, there were a lot of Bengals players that were good that just didn't fit the scheme, right? And so what good was it to have a guy like Carlos Dunlap if he can't really drop out in the coverage and do things in the 3-4 look that they want to do? And honestly, you had a lot of holdover from guys that were Marvin guys. And so you always hear the people have to come in and get their guys. It never really dawned on me that that would be a case until this season kind of happened, and we kind of moved away from Geno Atkins and let him ride off into the sunset. And AJ Green ended up going on his way. Not that AJ was a problem or anything like that, but a lot of those old guys, we kind of had to move out in order to bring in guys that better fit the scheme and better fit what Zac Taylor wants to do offensively. And obviously last year there was a lot of drama and a lot of noise that we were hearing through the grapevine, and you really haven't seen much of that or heard much of that this offseason. You've seen a lot of people kind of buying into what he wants to do. And I think that it really started with Joe Burrow. When Joe Burrow gave Zach that lifeline last year and really kind of went to bat for him, a lot of people are going to listen. It's just similar to like Aaron Rodgers. Unfortunately, he had that situation in Green Bay. But when those guys speak, you kind of tend to listen. And that's where it kind of started, I think, with Zach. And actually, I'll probably go even further and say it actually kind of started when the team didn't give up on him last season. And he kind of has – the one thing that I will say about him is anything that he's done wrong, which this was the exact opposite with Marvin Lewis, he's been critical of himself and he tries to avoid making the same mistakes. So even though I used to get on him, that was the one thing about Zac Taylor that I could say is if he has a weakness or something like that, he's not going to be stubborn and say, I'm just going to force my system if it doesn't work. We saw that last year where he didn't want to run the ball early in the season. And then towards the end of the season, we were just a run first team. Obviously, we didn't have Joe Burrow, but there was more of a commitment to that. And I think he also – for him to be willing to go back and get Frank Pollock, because a lot of people don't know when he first showed up here, a lot of us expected him to keep Frank Pollock because he was from the Marvin Lewis staff and he had done some major things with this offensive line. And I remember it coming out and Taylor saying, my system doesn't fit his blocking scheme. And for him to work with Frank Pollock this entire offseason and to change his scheme up to kind of marry it with Frank Pollock's, I think just shows the evolution and growth of him as a coach. But he is on the hot seat. That's just honestly the the realistic view for him. I mean, when you haven't won that many games and this is your third season, a lot of people are looking to you to start changing that and changing the culture in Cincinnati. And so far, it's been a lot of talk. It's been a lot of renovation and new jerseys and things like that. But this is going to be a big season for him to actually prove it. Now, I will say that I think if he's able to, he has had a tough break, I probably say, with injuries to some of the key players. Jonah Williams his first year, Joe Burrow the second year. If he can keep those guys healthy, and if he can keep the guys that he's brought into this locker room, such as a Cheeto, such as a Trey Hendrickson, and these guys, DJ Reader, and these guys that are becoming a nucleus of guys that weren't here throughout the Marvin Lewis era that never thought that they could beat the Steelers and stuff like that. If he can get those guys to work together, I think that he could at least get 7 wins. If he can get 7 wins, I think that that's okay. If he doesn't get that, I almost wonder, is Zac Taylor really the problem? Are the Bengals going to have to get into a situation where they draft or they hire another coach and then it's another system and then it's another 2 years of finding guys that fit your scheme? Honestly, I had to sit back and look at it realistically and say, like, some of these guys didn't fit the scheme. And if you have to do this yet again next season, it's tough.
Yeah, tough season. Well, tough, not tough, I want to say, but big season for the Bengals, right? We're really going to see kind of what they're, I think by this point, you should see whether that arrow's pointing up or down on this rebuild since the firing of Marvin Lewis. So we'll see what's going on with the Bengals. A lot of interesting stuff to watch down there in Cincinnati. I want to thank you for coming on, Ace. Let them know where to find you.
You guys can find me at New Stripe City on YouTube.
And you can also find him every Tuesday and Thursday during the regular season on AFC North Talk. Make sure you subscribe to that. But thank you, Ace, for coming on. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.